All right, hello again, everybody. What we've started on this week in math is fractions. And so what we've started off with our first page of notes in the notebook this week was just explaining what a fraction is and reviewing that from fourth grade. We went over some of the vocabulary that they're going to be using and some visuals with that. After we introduced and reviewed a little bit, the students got to play with some fraction towers where we found equivalent fractions for different sizes, and this was really to emphasize that 1/2 is equivalent to 2/4, and they actually got to build this and see this firsthand. So if you look in your student's notebook and you're trying to understand exactly what we've done on this page, is everything that is blue is all equivalent to 1/2, and they actually built these fractions themselves with the towers and saw how even though there's more pieces, they're all the same size. And the reds are all equivalent to 1/3, and the greens are all equivalent to 1/4. After we did that, we talked about different ways to find equivalent fractions. So if you look in your child's notebook, you should see this page here. We've talked about how you can multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same number to find a fraction that is equivalent. So here we did 1/3 times 2 to get 2/6, and then we always go back to the original fraction. That way they're not trying to multiply or divide really weird numbers or numbers that aren't familiar to them. So when we went back to the times 3, we did 3 times 1/3 to get 3/9, and then 5 times 1/3 to get 5/15. The other page of notes we did is the same exact setup, but it's with division. So we started with a larger number, and we had them divide top and bottom by 12, by 4, and by 2. What we did today is we looked at a multiplication chart, and we talked about how you can find all kinds of equivalent fractions just using the multiplication chart. So the way that we showed them is they could put one finger on 5, one finger on 11, and drag your finger across, and everything that your finger comes across is an equivalent fraction for 5/11. So 20/44 is the same size as 5/11. So this is what we used for our lesson today, and your child brought home some homework, and it looks like this. This was the Orgo lesson that we went over, and they can do it using their multiplication chart. That's exactly what this is showing here. So this is like a multiplication chart has been cut up, and they took the row for 4 and the row for 6, so this is just their multiples, and they've stacked them on top of each other to show all of the different ones that are equivalent to 4/6. So the first question they have is write two fractions that the two strips show. So they could choose any of these that they wanted, so I would put maybe 12/18 here and jump over here for 32/48 there. So that can be any one that they choose as long as it's equivalent to the 4/6, which is all right here together. On the second part, it says the fractions are related because the denominators are both multiples of 6. So whenever they're doing this diagram here, you want to show how 4/6 and 36/54 are related. So they will write their first fraction here, which is 4/6, and then they're going to put the second fraction, 36/54 here. Sorry. And then I always ask them, what do you multiply by 6 to get 54? And if they're not very good at their multiples or their math facts or anything, they can come up here to their multiplication chart and count. So they go 6, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So they would know that 6 times 9 is 54, and we tell them whatever they do to the denominator, they have to do to the numerator, and they check it to make sure it's correct. So 4 times 9 is 36, and that's this fraction here, 36/54, and that is how they're related. Down here, it's telling them to think about the fractions 2/3 and 3/4, and they have to figure out what denominator that they have in common. So I've shown my students today that you can use the multiplication chart, but when we start adding and subtracting fractions, they're going to have to list their multiples. So I went ahead and kind of previewed that a little. So I went ahead and I told them to list their 3s, and I tell them just to go ahead and do 5 and stop there. So 3, 6, 9, 12, and 15. Then they do the same thing for 4, which is their other denominator. So I'm going to put 4 up here, and then 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. Then they ask themselves once they get to 5 if they have any of the numbers that are the same. So if they look, they see that they have 12 that's the same. So that is going to be the denominator that they put down here. So we're going to put 12 here and 12 here. Then they ask again, what do you multiply by 3 to get to 12? They can come up here and count just like they did on the multiplication chart. 1, 2, 3, 4. And whatever they do to the denominator, they have to do to the numerator. So 2 times 4 is 8. And then they do the same exact process for the 4 to 12th. So 4 times 3 is 12. And again, whatever they do to the denominator, they do to the numerator. So times 3. And 3 times 3 is 9. Then it asks you to circle the fraction that is greater. So since they have common denominators now, they can clearly see that 3/4 is greater than 2/3, because once they have a common denominator, they'll see that one more piece is colored in versus the 8/12. And we'll do one more together. So when they list their multiples, they'll find that 30 is their common denominator for both. Okay, and then 6 times 5 is 30, and whatever you do to the bottom, do to the top. 5 times 5 is 25, and 5 times what gives you 30? And that'll be a 6 here. So 6 on top. 4 times 6 is 24. And again, circle the fraction that's greater. They'll see once they do this that 5/6 is greater than 4/5. Okay. And on the back, they're doing the same thing. So all of this section here is just like what we did on the front. It gives them their denominator. But the second part is the same thing, but it's not giving them their common. So they would have to list their multiples, and then they would have to figure out what they would multiply. So on this one, if I did 3 and 2, I would say 3. So 3, 6, 9, and 12. I'm going to go ahead and stop there. And 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and so on. So then I look for my least common, and I see that 6 is here. So my new denominators are going to be 6. Then they would just do this section here on their own. So 3 times 2 is 6. So then 1 times 2 is 2. 2 times 3 is 6, and 1 times 3 is 3. Okay. Then their last part says to look at the fractions in questions 1 and 2 above, and to just circle the greater fraction in each pair. So after they go through and answer all of these, they'll have to go back and compare with their new common denominator which fraction is actually larger. And so in this case, 1/2 is larger than 1/3. Okay, if you guys have any questions about anything, let me know. Thanks, see y'all later.